The question is simple. What evil spirit haunted the Villisca Axe Murder House? But the answer isn't. It's not a name you can write down. It's not one thing. To understand what people say haunts that house, you first have to understand what happened there. You have to go back to a hot summer night in 1912. Villisca, Iowa was a small town. A quiet town. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors. They went to church on Sundays. They left their doors unlocked. It was a good place to raise a family, and the Moore family was a good family. Josiah Moore, or Joe as people called him, was a successful businessman. He owned the local John Deere implement store. He was a prominent figure in town, well respected. He and his wife Sarah had 4 children. There was Herman, the oldest at 11. Then Catherine, 10. Then Boyd, who was 7, and little Paul, just 5 years old. They were a normal, happy family living in a simple white house on East 2nd Street. On Sunday, June 9, 1912, the Moores went to the Presbyterian Church. Sarah had organized the Children's Day program. All the Moore children participated. Catherine recited a piece. The whole family sang. It was a big event for the community. After the program, which ran late, the family walked home. 2 of their children's friends, Lena and Ina Stillinger, came with them for a sleepover. Lena was 12 and Ina was 8. They were the daughters of Joseph and Sarah Stillinger. It was a common thing to do back then. Kids staying over at a friend's house after a church event. They all got home around 10 p.m. They probably had a snack, maybe some milk and cookies, before heading to bed. Sarah put the 2 youngest boys, Boyd and Paul, in the downstairs bedroom with her and Joe. The older children, Herman and Catherine, slept upstairs, and the 2 Stillinger sisters, Lena and Ina, slept in the guest room, also upstairs. The house grew quiet. The town of Villisca went to sleep. Nothing seemed out of place. The next morning, Monday, June 10th, was different. Mary Peckham, the Moores' next-door neighbor, woke up and noticed the house was unusually still. The Moores were early risers. Usually, by this time, the house would be bustling with the sounds of children getting ready for the day. But there was nothing. The curtains were all drawn. Mary went to the back of her house to let her chickens out. She waited. Still nothing. By 7 a.m., she was worried. She went over and knocked on the Moores' front door. No answer. She tried to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. She went back and called Joe Moore's brother, Ross. Ross Moore arrived a little while later. He also tried knocking. He shouted for Joe and Sarah. Silence. He had a set of keys, but they wouldn't work in the lock. Frustrated and now seriously concerned, he went to the front of the house and peered into a window. It was too dark to see anything clearly. He finally gave up trying to be gentle. He got his keys out again and found one that would unlock the door. He stepped inside. The first thing he saw was the downstairs bedroom. Inside, on the bed, he saw 2 figures covered with a sheet. He saw dark stains on the bedding. He didn't need to see more. He ran back out onto the porch and told Mary Peckham to call the sheriff. What the town marshal, Hank Horton, found inside was a scene of pure horror. In the downstairs bedroom were the bodies of Josiah and Sarah Moore. They had been bludgeoned to death with an axe. Upstairs, in the children's room, were Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. They had met the same fate. In the guest room were Lena and Ina Stillinger. They too were dead. Every single person in the house, 8 people in total, 6 of them children, had been murdered in their beds as they slept. The killer had used Joe Moore's own axe, which was found in the guest room, wiped but not clean. The blade was bloody. The weapon of choice was brutal, personal. The killer had been methodical. Every victim had been struck in the head. The killer had also covered the faces of every victim with clothing or bed sheets after they were dead. Even more strangely, the killer had gone through the house and covered all the mirrors and glass surfaces with cloths and towels. A lamp at the foot of Joe and Sarah's bed had its chimney removed, the wick turned back. The chimney was found under a dresser. Another lamp was found at the foot of the Stillinger girl's bed, its chimney also removed. It was as if the killer had used the dim light of the lamp base to navigate the dark rooms. In the kitchen, a bowl of bloody water was found on a table, as if the killer had tried to wash their hands. A plate of uneaten food was next to it. The doors were all locked from the inside. The windows were shut. The killer had brought the keys inside after locking the back door and left them on the table. The crime scene was a collection of bizarre ritualistic details that made no sense. Why cover the mirrors? Why cover the victims' faces? Who would do this to an entire family and 2 visiting children, and then calmly lock up the house and disappear into the night? The news spread like fire. Villisca was shattered. The town of 2,000 people was suddenly the center of a national horror story. Fear gripped everyone. People bought new locks for their doors. They kept guns by their beds. The trust that had defined their small community was gone, replaced by suspicion. Everyone was a potential suspect. The investigation was chaotic from the start. In 1912, police work wasn't what it is today. There was no understanding of preserving a crime scene. Hundreds of townspeople walked through the murder house before it was secured. They touched things, they moved things, any potential evidence was likely contaminated or destroyed within hours. The list of suspects grew long. It seemed like everyone had a theory. Some pointed to Frank F. Jones, a powerful state senator and Joe Moore's former employer. Joe had worked for Jones for years before leaving to start his own competing business. He'd been very successful, taking a lot of business from Jones. The rumor was that the two men hated each other. Some even whispered that Joe was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law. Was it a business rivalry that turned deadly? Did Jones hire a man named William Blackie Mansfield to do the job? A private detective from the Burns agency certainly thought so. Mansfield was a suspected serial killer from Illinois, and the detective built a compelling case against him. But a grand jury failed to indict him, and his alibi seemed to hold up. Then there was the traveling preacher, Reverend George Kelly. He was an odd man, known for his fiery sermons and strange behavior. He had been in town for the Children's Day program. He left Villisca on an early morning train, hours before the bodies were discovered. Later, people remembered him telling children that they should be glad their parents weren't murdered in their beds. He seemed obsessed with the case. Years later, he confessed to the murders, giving a detailed account that seemed to match the crime scene. But his story was full of religious fervor and bizarre claims. He said a voice from God told him to slay utterly. He was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second ended in an acquittal. His confession was thrown out. He walked free. Another theory pointed to a different man named Moore. Henry Lee Moore was a serial killer active in the Midwest around the same time. He used an axe. He killed families in their sleep. The timeline and the method matched several of his other crimes. He was convicted of killing his own mother and grandmother with an axe months after the Villisca murders. But the connection was never proven. It was just another theory. And perhaps the most terrifying theory of all was that it was a random drifter. A nameless, faceless person passing through town on the railroad. Someone with no connection to the family, no motive other than a thirst for violence. Someone who slipped into town, committed an unspeakable act, and then slipped away never to be seen again. The case was never solved. The killer was never found. The town of Villisca was left with a deep, open wound. And the house on East 2nd Street became a monument to that wound. It changed hands many times over the years. Some families tried to live in it to make it a normal home again, but the story was too strong. The memory of what happened was baked into the walls. People who lived there reported strange occurrences. Doors opening and closing on their own. The sound of children crying when no children were there. A heavy, oppressive feeling that never seemed to lift. The house became known simply as the Axe Murder House. In the 1990s, the house was purchased by Darwin and Martha Lynn. They didn't want to tear it down. They felt it was a piece of history, a memorial to the victims. They restored it to look as it did in 1912. They opened it for tours, and for those brave enough, they allowed overnight stays for paranormal investigation. This is when the stories of the haunting truly began to take shape. This is when people started asking, in earnest, what was in that house. So we come back to the original question. What evil spirit haunts the Villisca Axe Murder House? When paranormal investigators and visitors talk about the house, they don't talk about one spirit. They talk about several possibilities. The first and most common belief is that the spirits of the victims are still there. The spirits of Joe and Sarah, their 4 children, and the 2 Stillinger girls. People who believe this theory see the haunting not as evil, but as tragic. They report hearing the faint sounds of children's laughter or whispers coming from the upstairs rooms. Some have seen a ball roll across the floor of the attic, seemingly on its own. They have captured electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, which they believe are the voices of the children. One of the most famous EVPs is a small voice that seems to say, "Get out." Is it a warning? Is it a plea? Or something else? People who have stayed overnight often focus on the children's rooms. They bring toys and leave them out, only to find them moved later. They feel sudden cold spots. They hear footsteps on the stairs when the house is empty. The feeling in these rooms is often described as sad, a deep and profound sadness. If these are the spirits of the victims, they might be trapped. They might be confused, forever replaying the last moments of their lives. Or they might be waiting for justice, for their killer to finally be named, so they can find peace. In this view, the spirit isn't evil. It is a victim. The evil is the act that was committed against them. But there's another theory, a darker one. Some people believe that the entity in the house is not the family, but the killer. They believe that an act of such intense violence and hatred can leave an imprint, a stain of energy that never fades. The person who committed these murders was filled with a rage that is hard to comprehend. Perhaps a piece of that rage, a shadow of the murderer's own spirit, became attached to the location where he committed his ultimate sin. This theory is supported by a different set of experiences. Visitors, particularly in the downstairs bedroom where Joe and Sarah were killed, report feeling a sense of aggression and menace. They feel watched. They feel a heavy, oppressive energy that makes it hard to breathe. Some have reported seeing a dark, shadowy figure standing in the corners of rooms, a tall man holding an axe. They feel a sense of pure malevolence. This isn't the sad energy of a lost child. This is something hostile. The closet in the parents' bedroom is often cited as a focal point for this dark energy. People standing near it have been scratched. They've been pushed. They've felt a sudden, irrational terror that forces them to flee the room. If the spirit is the killer, it's not looking for peace. It's relishing in the horror it created, a permanent resident in its own personal hell. Then there is a third theory, one that many paranormal investigators have come to believe. This theory says that the spirit in the house is neither the victims nor the killer. It is something else entirely, something inhuman. This idea suggests that there was an evil entity attached to the land or the house long before the Moores ever lived there, or that the sheer brutality of the murders acted as a beacon, drawing a dark entity to the location. The violence and negative energy created a doorway for something to come through. Those who subscribe to this theory point to the ritualistic nature of the crime. The covered mirrors, for example. In many folklores and spiritual beliefs, mirrors are seen as portals. Covering them could have been an attempt by the killer to prevent the victim's spirits from seeing who he was, or to stop them from coming back to haunt him. Or, if the killer was influenced by a dark entity, perhaps it was the entity itself that demanded the mirrors be covered, for its own reasons. Investigators using spirit boxes, devices that scan radio frequencies, and supposedly allow spirits to communicate, claim to have received terrifying messages. They say they've communicated with something that is not human, something that claims responsibility for the murders, something that laughs when asked about the children. They believe this entity fed off the fear and pain of that night, and it continues to feed off the fear of the people who visit the house today. It is a parasitic entity, and the house is its hunting ground. This would be the evil spirit in its truest sense. Not a human ghost, but something demonic, an ancient force of malevolence that found a perfect storm of tragedy to anchor itself to our world. This theory could also explain the bizarre confession of Reverend Kelly. He claimed a voice told him to slay utterly. Was he mentally ill, or was he, as some paranormal researchers believe, a man susceptible to influence who was pushed over the edge by an external evil force? It's a chilling thought. It takes the blame away from a single flawed human and places it on something supernatural and incomprehensible. Finally, there is the concept of a residual haunting. This is less about a conscious spirit and more about a recording. The idea is that a traumatic event can be so powerful that it imprints itself on the environment. The house itself is like a piece of photographic film that captured the horror of that night. The sounds people hear, the crying, the footsteps, the screams, are not active spirits trying to communicate. They are just an echo. A playback of the energy from June 10th, 1912. The house is forever playing a ghost story on a loop. This would explain why the experiences are often the same sounds in the same rooms. It's a memory trapped in time. In this case, the house isn't haunted by a spirit, but by the event itself. The evil is a memory that won't fade. These are the theories. The victims, the killer, an inhuman entity, or a residual echo of the past. The truth is, no one knows for sure. And maybe that is the real source of the haunting, the unknown. The lack of an answer. The injustice of it all. 8 people died, and no one ever paid for the crime. That lack of closure is a powerful thing. It creates a vacuum, and people try to fill it with stories, with explanations. The paranormal provides a framework for understanding something that is, in a rational sense, incomprehensible. The house has a profound effect on people. In 2014, a paranormal investigator staying overnight in the house was found with a self-inflicted stab wound to his chest. He survived, but it was a shocking reminder that the darkness in that house, whatever its source, can feel very real. It can get inside your head, it can prey on your fears. Whether it was a ghost that attacked him or the psychological weight of the place that drove him to it, the result was the same. The house claimed another victim, in a way. So, what evil spirit haunts the Villisca Axe Murder House? Perhaps the evil spirit is simply the story itself. It's the brutal, unsolved truth of what happened to the Moore family and the Stillinger girls. It's the spirit of a community's broken trust. It's the spirit of fear that made people lock their doors. It's the spirit of injustice that let a killer walk free. And it's the spirit of our own fascination with the dark side of human nature. The house on East 2nd Street is more than just a haunted house. It's a memorial. It's a question mark. It stands as a silent witness to a terrible crime. The spirits people encounter there might be real, or they might be projections of our own grief and fear. But the feeling is undeniable. When you stand in that house, you are standing in a place where a great and terrible sadness occurred. You can feel the weight of it. You can feel the silence that was left behind. The evil wasn't a ghost that came after. The evil was there on that one night in 1912. It was human. It swung an axe. It took 8 lives, and it was never caught. The spirit that haunts Villisca isn't a demon with a name. It is the ghost of that one terrible, unanswered question. Who did it? And why? That is the question that lingers in the silent rooms. That is the true spirit that haunts the Villisca Axe Murder House. And it's a spirit that may never find rest.